In this video, we're going to be talking real briefly about policies and procedures in terms of student handbooks, employee handbooks, and other resources that you may develop as a governance board as a school. We've talked in the previous videos about the importance of having a strong governance, in terms of strong governance, of having solid policies and a strong policy framework in your school so that students and parents and staff know the rules and regulations. An extension of that is your student handbooks and your employee handbooks. And in student handbooks, employee handbooks, parent handbooks, what you will see is oftentimes school districts will, and the same applies to charter schools, will include certain policies in their handbooks, but also in their handbook there may be a bit more procedure when you talk about administrative procedure. Handbooks will provide general information for students and parents. What's the start time for the school? How do they find out what the calendars are? When will those be set? What are the excusal requirements? They will set out expectations and rules for students in terms of being respectful, not using cell phones. They may have dress code policies in there, transportation policies. So both policies and kind of rules and information you want in your handbook for students so that students can have a reference document where they can look up what the rules and regulations are for the charter school. The key, though, in developing sort of these two different bodies of things, meaning your board policies and your handbooks, is to ensure that they're consistent. So be sure that you are always going back and starting. Here's our board policy on an issue. What now are we going to be including in our student handbook or our employee handbook? If we're going to have more in the student handbook or the employee handbook, let's just be sure that that additional information we have is consistent with the policy itself. When you talk about student handbook, as I said, you might have the calendar, behavior expectations, dress code, graduation requirements, lockers, what happens in the lunchroom, medication. You may have policies or statements prohibiting plagiarism, technology use, visitors. You may include in your student handbook complaint forms. So if a student has a complaint about bullying or harassment, or a list of individuals who they would go to if they believe they've been sexually harassed, in their handbook they may look to see who the Title IX coordinator is. So the student handbook is both a document or a resource that students can have, but it's also a way to present to the student what those rules and regulations are and ask the student to sign off that they have read them and that they understand them. So that when you are enforcing something and a student says, I didn't know I couldn't do that, you can then refer back and say, remember when we handed out the handbooks and you were required to acknowledge you'd received it and it was your responsibility to know what was in it. Same is true for employee handbooks. Employee handbooks may have policies and procedures with respect to employees. You want to be sure if you're drafting these that you do at least check with your legal counsel because you don't want to establish any contractual rights in your handbook. Your contract with your employees is the only thing that establishes contractual rights, or should be the only thing. So you want to make sure you have appropriate language in your employee handbooks. But in the employee handbook, again, what are the applicable laws? They acknowledge that they know they have to comply with IDEA. They know they have to comply with Title IX. They know they have to comply with various things. The employee handbook may have the chain of command, the organizational chart, the general employment practices. What are the work conditions, hours of work, dress code, pay and benefit, discipline, termination. You may have your grievance policy in there. And so when you talk about the employee handbook, again, it's an opportunity for you to be able to say to an employee at the beginning of their tenure, here is the handbook. We expect you to read this, to be familiar with these, to know what these are, and to abide by them. And you can get their signature to say that, yes, in fact, they do abide by that and they did receive it. So it's just an opportunity really to get your rules and your procedures in front of the individuals that need to know them and to ensure that they have looked at them or and agree to them. So when you talk about policies, handbooks, all of these things, where do you look? Where do you start? If you're a 2X and a 2R charter school, a non-instrumentality charter school that isn't going to adopt the district policies as sort of a whole set, where do you start? As I said, I would look at other district policies. I would look at those policies, see what they have, see if they fit with your school. I would look at the U.S. Department of Education website. They have some sample policies on there with respect particularly to the civil rights laws. The Equal Opportunity Employment Commission, their website, they have policies on there. The Department of Public Instruction has sample policies. If you go on, you'd see a non-discrimination policy, a bullying policy. I think they have a wellness policy, a number of different policies, and your school district websites. Looking at, as we said, at your school district, if you're an instrumentality or a non-instrumentality, or at other districts. In addition, there are policy services out there. And I know Neola is one policy service. At this point, I don't think Neola has a set of policies that apply to Wisconsin charter schools, but certainly as you are looking forward, it certainly is an organization to contact. And there may be other organizations out there. WASB has policy services for school districts, and if you're an instrumentality of a school district, then perhaps you're able to review those policies and see which ones may work for your school. So a number of different places to get model policies. It's not an easy process. It seems overwhelming. But certainly just getting started on it and hitting on those big ones that we talked about, as well as the policies that are in a handout that we have developed and put forth and given references to. So you would find it both on the Works website. You'd also find it on the in this BuzzFeed course. There will be a link to it. But that handout will identify a number of required policies for schools. It will identify a number of policies that really you are going to want to consider for best practices. And then hopefully it will provide you some information with the cites to the statutes and the cites to the laws that you can look at those and determine, if you're drafting the policies, what might need to be in them. So hopefully that handout will be helpful and be a good place certainly to start.